Good evening, and welcome to the Thursday, September 19th, 2024, Village of Riverside Board of Trustees regular meeting. Please stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clerk Sol, please call the roll.
President Pollock.
Here.
Trustee Clarity.
Here.
Trustee Evans.
Here.
Trustee Gallegos.
Here.
Trustee Marshazga.
Here.
Trustee Mateo.
Here.
Manager Francis.
Here.
Attorney Pickerel.
Here.
Also present Clerk Sol.
We have a quorum for tonight's meeting. President's report. First, I'd like to bring everyone's attention to Railroad Safety Week next week. September 23rd to 29th is Railroad Safety Week. They've titled it C-Tracks Think Train Week. It is a time to raise awareness about the importance of railroad safety. Let's keep our eyes and ears open when near train tracks, and always remember to prioritize safety. Together, we can prevent accidents and save lives. For more information, you can go to their website, ctracksthinktrain.org. So thank you, and please, especially in this town with our busy railroad, please keep that in mind every day throughout the year. Upcoming meetings, September 23rd, the Parks and Recreation Board will be meeting at the Public Library, Riverside Public Library. September 25th, the Planning and Zoning Commission meets here at the Town Hall. Upcoming events, September 20th, Family Bingo Bash at 6:30 at Township Hall. Registration is required and spots are still available. That's tomorrow evening. A week from tomorrow, 9/27, September 27th, Parks and Rec Department will reschedule concert in the park at Big Ball Park from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. featuring Johnny Rustler and the Beach Bum Band. And that concludes the President's report this evening.
I'm excited to announce that the village has applied, or did apply rather, for the third round of the State of Illinois Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant for energy planning. And we were just notified the other day that we will receive $27,400 in grant funding. And this does not require a local match, which is a pretty big deal. This grant builds upon the in-progress development of the village's first climate action and resiliency plan and focuses specifically on energy conservation measures. With this grant, the village will be able to study and expand on the projects and initiatives identified through our C4 engagement and produce a dedicated energy plan that will help in seeking future grant funds. The grant funding is split between energy data tracking and technical support, public engagement processes, and consultant fees to support research and analysis, also education via newsletters, surveys, and meetings. I would like to take this opportunity to recognize and thank Assistant Village Manager Monroe and Village Clerk Sol for their work on this particular grant application. Many may not realize the amount of effort that goes into a grant application, and we submit many, and few are successful. So, and also given the limited administrative staff that the village has, I'm always impressed by the number of grants that our staff obtain on behalf of the village to fund projects that for the village needs and wants. A couple of other items I wanted to note is the upcoming board meeting. Barry Dunn will return at our next meeting to discuss community feedback received beyond the survey results that will be presented this evening. Williams Architects will also be providing a facility update. and budget discussion will continue with the financial forecast. It is important to remember that these documents and plans that are reviewed on an annual basis are evolving documents and are focused on this snapshot in time. As the economy and needs of the community change, so do these documents. That's all I have this evening.
Thank you. Resident comments on non-agenda items. This is the time of every meeting where we invite public comment on non-agenda items. Comments for items on the agenda may be made when the item is brought up. And is there anyone in attendance who would like to speak on an item that is not on the agenda? Seeing none. Consent agenda. Clerk Sol, please read the consent agenda.
Approve voucher list of bills, September 19th, 2024. Approve Village Board of Trustees regular meeting minutes, September 5th, 2024. Approve Village Board of Trustees executive session meeting minutes, September 5th, 2024. Review and file August 2024 department reports, Public Works, Police, Fire, Community Development, and Finance. Review and file board and commission minutes, Sesquicentennial Committee regular meeting, August 12th, 2024. Landscape Advisory Commission regular meeting, August 13th, 2024. Riverside TV Commission regular meeting, September 9th, 2024. A resolution authorizing the village manager to waive competitive bidding and execute a sales agreement with JX Truck Center for a total amount not to exceed $146,749.98 for the purchase of a 2025 Peterbilt plow truck chassis. A resolution waiving competitive bidding and authorizing the village manager to enter into various purchase orders for fiscal year 2024.
There is one item that I would like to remove from the consent agenda, and that is item F, resolution authorizing the village manager to waive competitive bidding and execute a sales agreement with JX Truck Center for a total amount not to exceed $146,749.98 for the purchase of a 2025 Peterbilt plow truck chassis. Since that was discussed at the last meeting, off the consent agenda, and also because we have some new information about the CIP, I wanted to remove that and move it to after our CIP discussion, or concurrent with the CIP discussion as well. Do any other items need to be removed? Seeing none, someone like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda with the exception of item F?
So moved.
And so seconded.
A motion and a second. Clerk Sol.
Trustee Clarity?
Aye.
Trustee Evans?
Aye.
Trustee Gallegos?
Aye.
Trustee Marshazga?
Aye.
Trustee Mateo?
Aye.
Motion is approved and the consent agenda is approved. Department and board and commission reports. We have an economic development update from Assistant Manager Ashley Monroe.
All right, well, good evening, thank you. We wanted to bring forward a very short update on some economic development activity in the community. We've had a lot of things happen over the last year and just thought it would be nice to give it a quick update for the board and the general public about the various efforts that we make in Riverside to be good to our existing and potential businesses and what we're doing to create more development potential. So over the last year, we have received inquiries regarding our village-owned properties, and that includes the property at the corner of Burlington and Harlem that, as you know, has been approved as far as zoning for the development proposal for Starbuds, and that was in August of this year. So we're waiting for future development there. Staff has fielded and regularly fields requests for interested businesses to come into town, both inside the central business district and outside along our Harlem and Ogden corridors. Some of those uses include retail, which is exciting for our community, some fitness uses. There have been inquiries about counseling, clinics, and other sorts of things. So we'll see what actually comes in and where they locate. Staff always tries to do its best to support and facilitate everyone who comes in. We've made changes to some of our materials that have come out for businesses, and we've also translated some of those materials directly into Spanish, which has been helpful for a lot of our newer businesses that have come in and just feel more comfortable speaking in Spanish. So we're trying to do our part in making everyone feel welcome and provide everybody the tools that they need to succeed. The downtown, I'll just note that we're still waiting on the approved planned use development at 28 to 30 East Burlington Street. We saw the move-in of Katrina Tequila Bar. So they've expanded and come into the site on this side of the tracks, and inside is really fun and beautiful if you haven't stopped by. Northwood Financial opened at 37 East Burlington. We had Next Level Wellness of Riverside is an IV infusion service that opened on the 3rd floor of the arcade building at 1 Riverside Road. We were notified that Riverside Foods received an equipment upgrades program as a recipient. They're going to receive from the state of Illinois some ability to make energy efficiency upgrades and other improvements to the store, which is really exciting for them and for us as a community to have that resource. Quincy Street and East Avenue and Forest Avenue streetscape projects remain on track. The board has approved the ability for us to apply for the ITEP grant. That's still in progress, but due at the end of the month. That would be awarded, if we're awarded those funds, it would be in 2025, and any construction wouldn't take place until 2026. So that kind of goes into our capital discussion. Outside of our central business district, we saw the opening of Asiano at a new restaurant at 2728 South Harlem. In that same shopping district, we have been engaging at the board level about the gateway entry signs and some site plan changes to that shopping district. And so we're continuing that discussion. We've seen Forest Asset Management move into 345 East Burlington. We have Begbie Wealth Advisory, LLC at 362 East Burlington. And just to note, we still get inquiries about the building out on Harlem. It's not really used, but and many of the spaces are vacant, but the village about a year ago had applied for a no cash bid process with Cook County, and we're still looking for a response in relationship to what that could do and if that would be available for future redevelopment. Finally, I'll just note that we've been really busy working with Visit Oak Park. That's our state coordinated tourism bureau. And they've been featuring lots of Riverside businesses in their monthly blog posts, lots of village activities. And they recently helped set up a new spot on WGN for the upcoming Hop Stop. That'll be next Monday on the 23rd at 1 o'clock. So you can tune in and see that. And finally, the Economic Development Commission has been busy. They put together their goals. They're included in your packet. And just some of the highlights that they're focused on this year, or next year, I should say, is that they want to do another feature of a Taste of Riverside 2025, kind of like a restaurant week. We want to bring that back. And then just continued awareness and promotion of our existing and potential businesses. So if you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer. And as always, we're really interested in talking more with both Riverside residents that have interest in supporting our businesses, creating businesses, or anybody outside that would be a great fit in Riverside. So, any other questions?
Any questions for Assistant Manager Monroe?
No? Okay, busy
Thank you.
night. Thank you.
Thank you. Pending business, community survey presentation by Barry Dunn, Director Malchiotti.
Good evening, President Pollock, Village Trustees, Manager Francis. We're excited to present to the board one of the important deliverables in this process, results of the community survey. Jeff Andreessen will walk us through the summary. Elsa Fisher from the Barry Dunn team, along with myself, are also here to answer any questions. But at this time, I'll turn it over to Jeff to present the summary.
Thank you. Nice to be back and to share some results with you from our community-wide survey. I believe everybody has a copy of the full report, which has much more detail and insights than what I'm going to be sharing with you tonight, which is really going to be more of the high-level results. And I was told that pointing this is, there we go. I don't know if that was you or me.
It was me.
Okay. So just to remind everybody, this was a community-wide survey. We actually invited everybody in the community the opportunity to participate in the survey. We did this first by using the village's water bill database, which has everybody's email address, street address, so that we can be sure that these are Riverside residents who are getting the invitation, and we sent them an email with a secure and individualized survey link so that they could complete the survey. We also used an independent third-party list that includes everybody's address in Riverside. We wanted to use that because that would be more likely to include people who are renters within the community who may not be getting a water bill directly from the village if it's part of their rent. So we wanted to make sure that we leveraged both lists. We deduped one against the other to make sure everybody had one opportunity to respond. And data collection began at the very end of May and went through the middle part of July. We ended up with just over 300 respondents, 311. Our target was for 300, so we exceeded our goal a little bit. And for the online survey, residents had the option to complete the survey in Spanish or English, whichever language they felt most comfortable with. When we completed our sample of 311, we compared their demographics, where they live in the community, their age, their gender, whether or not they have children under 18, their race, ethnicity, whether they're a homeowner or a renter. And we compared our sample demographics to census data for the entire village. And we weighted our sample on those demographics and regional distributions to align with census data. So we know that the results that we're presenting here are representative of the entire community by those demographics and by region. And with a sample of this size, the maximum margin of error is just over 5.5%. All the slides I'm showing you tonight are also in your report. This is just giving you a sense of the distribution of our sample across those different demographic variables. And again, those with an asterisk: gender, age, homeowner, renter status, race, ethnicity, children under 18. Those are all reflective of census data as well as in our sample. Ethan, I'm just going to ask you to drive the slides.
Sounds good.
And then the next slide shows the regional distribution of our respondents. So the little dots represent the individual respondents. So we had a pretty even distribution across the entire community. In the report, when you see us calling out regional differences, north, central, southwest, and southeast, those are based on the village divisions. So you'll have this map in the report to reference any of those regional differences in the findings. So with that, our survey usually begins very broadly by asking residents their overall opinion of the Parks and Rec Department on a 0 through 10 scale. Anything under a neutral rating of 5 is considered a dissatisfaction or an unfavorable score, 5 being neutral, meaning no strong opinion one way or the other. And then anything 6 or higher is considered a favorable or positive rating. And you can see from the distribution that all of those segments in green, which represent positive scores, those total 66%. So 2/3 of the residents have at least a somewhat favorable opinion of the Parks and Rec Department, and that includes 23% who hold it in the highest regard, giving it scores of 9 or 10, which are obviously the highest ratings. By comparison, only 15% have a negative opinion of the department, and the remaining 19% are neutral, again, meaning they don't have a strong opinion one way or the other. The average rating on the 0 through 10 scale is a 6.7, so in that good range reflected overall. And the ratio that you see at the far right, that just indicates that for anybody who has a negative opinion, you've got 4 or 5 people who have a positive opinion of the department overall. One thing I'll call out on this, that 6.7 rating, higher scores tended to come from men and more middle-aged residents. Lower than average, but still favorable scores tended to come from women and the youngest residents, those under age 45. And that female, younger resident, and in later findings, we'll see households with children tend to be the most avid users of the parks and programs, but also tend to be less satisfied than average with some of the other metrics, which we'll get to in a minute. We also asked follow-up questions, open-ended questions, which are in your report. The strengths behind those high numbers tend to come for the programs and the events that the department provides and sponsors. The opportunities for improvements that they'd like to see most often is more communication, more information about what the Parks Department is offering, and also improvements to some of the locations, playground equipment, tennis and pickleball courts, ball fields, and so on. We then asked a question without checking any information: what % of your property taxes do you think goes to the Parks and Rec Department, just to see what people thought. And they tend to overestimate the share of those tax dollars going to the department. On average, they thought just over 6% of their property taxes went to the department. The actual response is that bottom category, less than 1%, and only 6% overall correctly estimated what that share was. When we then, on the next slide, informed them that in fact less than 1% goes to the Parks and Rec Department, we asked them, thinking about everything the department provides, programs, events, parks, facilities, other services, what kind of a value does it represent given that less than 1% share of property taxes? And nearly 3 out of 4 think it's at least a good, if not a great or excellent value for what it does. Open-ended comments often said, I had no idea it was less than 1%. I can't believe everything they're doing for such a low percentage of my property taxes. So a lot of these value comments were coming back and reflecting the positive overall ratings that we were seeing from the Parks and Rec Department. We then asked if they or anyone in their household has been to one of the community's parks or locations in the past year. Virtually everybody said yes, someone in our household has been to one of those locations, 96%. And you can see in the table the ones that are mentioned most often. At least half of the residents said that they or someone in their home have been to Swan Pond, the Water Tower, Big Ball Park, or Guthrie Park, and nearly half have also been to Centennial or Harrington Park. So those were by far the most widely used. For the next slide, we then looked at where people live who report going to those different locations. So this top row here shows the overall distribution of where people live in our samples. So 25% live in the north region, almost half in the central, 7% southwest, and 21% southeast. And the circles identify where there are statistically meaningful differences. So Harrington Park gets 29% of people from the southeast region, which is significantly higher than the overall distribution that they represent, that residents represent from that area. More significantly, Patriots Park, almost half of those visitors come from the north, which otherwise represents about half as much of the overall population. So there are some regional differences of parks and locations drawing from the most immediate neighborhood, but what's more striking on this is how few of those differences there are. And what that tells us is that for most of these locations, each one is drawing pretty much evenly from throughout the entire community. It's not just people who live within a block or two of these parks or facilities, they're drawing people from throughout Riverside, which is good news. We then asked those who said, yes, we've been to one of these locations, to rate their overall satisfaction with the parks and facilities on a 0 through 10 scale on a number of attributes. And most of these reflect the overall scores. If you look at the average ratings over to the right, you see scores mostly in the 7s or higher. The really good news is that you're strongest on safety, People are most satisfied with the level of safety that they feel at your park and locations. In fact, 52%, a small majority, are completely satisfied with the level of safety that they experience there. You also get a high score on accessibility, parking paths, entrances and exits. However, there are some items that fall lower relative to those other attributes, getting closer to an average rating of 5. And those include the condition of some of those locations, the tennis and pickleball courts and the playground equipment in particular. Over a quarter, almost a third, said they're unhappy with the physical conditions of those amenities at the parks. About half as many also felt the same way about the condition of the ball fields. And this is where we see those big differences. The higher scores tend to come from long-term residents, people who've been here a long time. The lower scores tend to be from the people who are actually using these facilities, those with children, newer residents. If anybody gave a score of 6 or lower, we asked, well, why are you not more satisfied? Is there any particular locations or issues that are driving that lower score? Ethan, if you could go to the next slide. A number of people just mentioned specific sources of dissatisfaction without attributing them to any specific park or location. The ones that come up most often are varied responses around playgrounds again, around the ball fields, mostly around upkeep or flooded fields, and then other upkeep or maintenance issues pretty scattered around landscaping or weed control, the pickleball, tennis ball courts, trash, amenities, people who would like to see more bathrooms provided at those locations. On the next slide, we see similar responses for specific locations. So these are the ones that came up most often as a source for dissatisfaction. And when we asked, what are you unhappy with at Harrington Park, Turtle Park, Swan Park? If you could click one more time, Ethan, please. The responses come up, and they're made largely around the same issues. There's a little variation depending on the amenities. For example, at Turtle Park, some comments about the sand needing to be replaced more often or cleared of weeds, but that was obviously very specific to Turtle Park. But for the most part, these concerns are around the same issues that we saw overall. Playgrounds, ball fields, the courts, upkeep and landscaping. And in a few cases that they feel that they'd like to see more at these locations, that they're pretty basic, there's really nothing much to do with these locations, again, especially if somebody has young children. For the few people on the next slide, the few people who said we haven't been to any of Riverside parks or locations in the past year, it was only 10 people. When we asked why not, we got a scattering of responses, but the top answers were, my children are grown, why would I go to a park? This is the most confounding response, and we see it in every agency that we do work for. People who have been active in the park agencies when they have young children, once those children are out of the house, they think, well, why would I use the park district? They don't have anything for me. So that's not unusual, but it was among the top responses for non-usage here. Others, not enough for my age group. There's really not much to do at those locations. I'm not as familiar with what's available, or I go elsewhere, a couple of people said. So then we started asking questions, well, what types of amenities or activities does your household have an interest in or have a need for? And so we asked these one by one. These were simple yes/no questions. Are you interested in trails? Do you have a need for pickleball courts, outdoor gazebo, and so on? Virtually everybody uses trails or wants trails. Again, we see this everywhere. But what's interesting was everything else that we tested, pickleball courts, gazebo, playground equipment with inclusive features, basketball courts, sports field, splash pads, spray grounds, ball fields, tennis courts, fitness stations along trails, each one of those garnered about the same level of interest or demand, roughly about a third, give or take a few percentage points. At least a third of the residents said each of those were of interest to them. And the people who said yes to almost all of those, again, are the newer residents, the younger residents, and those with children, those who are looking for more activities for their households. The walking and biking trails are of interest to everybody, young, old, new residents, long-term residents, with or without children. We then ask a question, if you're interested in trails, for example, how well is your need for trails currently being met, whether by the Parks and Rec Department or any other local provider? Same thing for sports fields, for a splash pad or spray ground. And what we do then is we track their level of demand, so on the vertical axis. So you remember it was 90-some% saying we're interested in trails. And everything else was in this kind of 20 to 40% range. And then when they rate on a 1 to 5 scale how well that demand is being met, anything over on this side means a majority are saying, yeah, my need for X is being met. Everything on this side of the vertical axis is less than half saying it's being met. So trails, the amenity that's most in demand, are pretty well available, whether it's by the Parks and Rec Department, Forest Preserves of Cook County, other neighboring agencies, whatever it might be. People have pretty readily available access to trails if they're interested in them. But everything else is falling into this less than 50% quadrant of lower priority gaps. They're lower priority because they're not in demand to a majority of people, but they're all consistently, again, in that 20 to 40% range. You can see baseball, softball fields are close to being readily met. They're just not quite there. And one of the other ways I like to look at this is if I take a diagonal line from this corner up to here, anything above that comes closer to being a higher priority gap, a fairly reasonable level of demand, but virtually nobody's saying this is currently available to me. So the things that fall in there, a splash pad, a spray ground, trail fitness stations, outdoor gazebo for outdoor events, basketball courts, and then to some extent pickleball courts and inclusive playground features. Any questions on how this is being presented or shared? Okay. Then we finally wrap up and say, well, if the Parks and Rec Department can only do 1 or 2 of these things, which 1 or 2 would be most important to you? We actually asked them to rank the top 3. The percents that are in the dark sections are the percent saying this is my number 1 priority. And not surprisingly, trails comes up as the number 1 priority again. Almost half of the respondents said if the department isn't going to do anything else but one thing, I want more trails, I want better trails, I want more connectivity. And then another 26% said, I've got something else at number 1, but this is my 2nd or 3rd priority. And everything else kind of scatters on that top priority. Playground equipment with inclusive features is a distant second, but there are 3 items that come up with fairly high top 3 priorities. Again, playgrounds with inclusive features, an outdoor gazebo, and or a splash pad or a spray ground. Those were the top 3 priorities that residents expressed beyond trails. We then did the same exercise with indoor facilities and asked again, does your household have a need currently use, or are you interested in a fitness center, a gym with courts, indoor track, et cetera, et cetera? A majority said, yes, we're interested in a fitness center. And almost half said the same for gym space, indoor track, or studio exercise space. The rest fell down with lower levels of demand there. And just over 1 out of 5 residents said, I don't have a need for any of these things. None of these are important to us. When we then ask, well, how well is your current need for a fitness center being met? And again, we put this in the context of not just by the Parks and Rec Department, since it doesn't offer a fitness center, but by any other provider. It could be a private health club, it could be a local YMCA, it could be the Loyola health center, whatever it might be, how well is your demand being met? The 60% who said, I'm interested in a fitness center, very few of them said, my need is currently being met in the area. Even though some of those options might be available, in their perception, they're too far away, they're too expensive, the hours don't fit, whatever it might be, that's a big gap to them. And then likewise, everything else that is in less demand, but fewer than 20% who are interested in any of these indoor amenities said that their need is mostly or completely being met. Again, if we look at that diagonal here, aside from a fitness center, gym space, exercise space, and an indoor track would be the ones that are closest to that larger gap category. Yes?
So just to be clear, with the imaginary diagonal that you've drawn, this is residents' perceptions of the availability of these things in approximate location rather than an actual absence or lack thereof, correct?
It's their perception. We just asked them, for those people who are interested, so only maybe 30% said, I'm interested in a climbing wall. So just those people who said, I want a climbing wall, when we asked, how well is your need being met by anybody in the area, probably 5%, 3% said it's mostly or completely being met. Meaning 97% said, no, it's not. I don't have a climbing wall anywhere around here, or I don't know where one is.
I just wanted to make sure that I
Yeah.
understood that it was
Yeah.
based on the residents' perception
It's
rather than
completely
actual
their perception.
amenities.
Completely their perception.
Thank you.
Yes. And then finally, we wrap up this section. Ethan, if you can go with, again, if the Parks and Rec Department were to focus on any one item, which one would be your top, should be its top priority? Again, the dark sections represent the number one responses. A fitness center, which again was in the highest demand, came up most often as number one. About half as many opted for gymnasium space. And then in terms of the top three, over 2/3 included fitness center in their top three, and just over half a gymnasium, followed by an indoor track and or studio or exercise space. We then moved on to questions about programs and events, first asking if they or someone in their household had participated in a Parks and Rec Department program in the last 12 months. Half of them said yes, 50% said no, we haven't participated in any. Among those who said yes, the majority of them mentioned programs mostly for younger people, summer camps, youth sports, before after school programs, early childhood. Another 6% said youth or teen non-athletic programs. We got in the low teens percentage-wise for adult or senior programs, but again, most of the program participants are citing summer camps and youth programs. What they were much more likely to say they participate in are the community events that the department and the village sponsor, especially the farmers market. 85% said someone in our household has been to one of the farmers market events in the past year. A majority are going to some event around the 3rd or 4th of July, or a combination of the two. 40% said they've been going to the summer concerts at Big Ball Park. So the connection for most people in this community is more on the events coming from the department, less so from the programs, especially if somebody doesn't have young people in their home. So with that, if they've participated in a program or event, we ask their satisfaction 0 through 10 with the programs and events that the department provides. And here, when you look at these average ratings, they're all very high, mid-7s or higher. You've got almost a majority, 45% or more, giving the department the highest scores on each of these attributes for the programs and event, the overall experience, the staff involved, costs, scheduling convenience, the quality of the activity, and ease of registration. Ease of registration had a little bit of a dissatisfied. Most of those comments were, things fill up too quickly, there's never an opening for me or for my kids, or trouble navigating the registration platform. And again, the full report has examples of those full verbatims in them. But again, these scores are all very positive in terms of the experience that people have with the programs and events that the department provides. We then ask the same question about demand and supply. First, the dissatisfaction, again, mostly came from registration issues or difficulty. About 1 in 5, and this isn't a lot of people, this is out of 43 people, so a fifth of 43, this is 7 or 8 people maybe. The before after school programs mostly just said they were looking for more structured activities at that, and again, the verbatims call out those specifics in a little more detail. Okay, we then ask, does your household have a need or interest in programs for these age groups? Early childhood under 5, youth programs or youth sports 5 to 11, teen programs, adult sports and athletics, or activities for active adults ages 65 plus. You remember the earlier slide where people said these are the programs we're attending? They were all in that youth category. The biggest response for demand is for adult programming. Now, it stands to reason. Every household we spoke to has adults in it, and not everyone has youth in it. In fact, about 40% of our sample had households with children under 18, meaning 60% didn't have children. They might be young people who haven't started a family yet or don't plan to. They might be empty nesters. So in that sense, it's not surprising, but it is important to see that some of the larger responses are coming more in demand for activities for adults. And then we plot out how well those needs are being met. Good news, those who are interested in youth sports for ages 5 through 11, a majority of them think there's something pretty readily available currently, whether it's through the Parks and Rec Department, whether it's through AYSO or a Little League organization or some kind of travel opportunity for youth sports. But in any case, that 25, 30% who have a need for youth athletics feel that that need is being met. Everything else is falling in this lower quadrant, and again, if you look at that diagonal, the 3 things that are above that diagonal are all adult related. Adult sports, non-sports adult programs, or active older adult opportunities. And then finally, when we ask which one is the most important and which is in the top 3, adult programs comes up most often as the number 1 priority, but a couple of youth items, early childhood and youth sports, are still important each to about 1 in 5 residents. So it's not like they're saying, we want you to push aside all the youth stuff and focus on adults. We want more of a mix, youth and adult opportunities. And then when we ask specifically, if somebody said, well, we want more youth programs, we ask, well, what kind of youth programs would you like to see? And the youth programs that come up most often are especially for the youngest children. Early childhood programs, toddler playtime programs, daycare, babysitting. For adults, the thing that they like to see more than anything else are group fitness options. More than twice as much as the next top preferences. These were all open-ended questions, so this was them telling us in their own words. If something wasn't age-specific, it was pretty evenly spread between arts and crafts, nature programs, tennis, dance. And then the top event request that came up most often was more music events, more concerts, more musical activities. We then asked, okay, if you're not going to the Parks and Rec Department in Riverside for your recreation or fitness or other activities, where are you going? And a majority said, we're going to other nearby agencies. And usually those were park agencies in North Riverside, Berwyn, LaGrange, Oak Brook, Brookfield. This is in order. Brookfield, Western Springs, Burr Ridge, Forest Park, as well as the forest preserves of Cook County. That was actually higher up, but it's just separate as a forest preserve. 30% said they're going to private health clubs or private health facilities, most often Loyola Center for Fitness, the Riverside Swim Club, YMCA. They didn't specify which YMCA. I think you've got a couple in nearby communities, but at least one of them came up third, followed by LA Fitness. And then other public sources, the ones that came up most often for public sources was local schools or the high school, the library, recreation groups, soccer programs, travel sports, and then other outdoor providers, the zoo, Morton Arboretum, local golf courses. So that's where they're going now if they're not finding what they're looking for here. Okay, then we asked a couple of questions about priorities for your existing parks and amenities. And here's where this difference between the two groups really came clear. We first asked, when it comes to playground equipment, should the Parks and Rec Department replace and expand one or two playgrounds with larger, more unique structures? A small majority, 56% said yes, versus replace playground equipment with new but similar size structures. So kind of the same scale as opposed to one or two that's a little bit different or bigger, 44%. So it's kind of evenly split, 56 to 44, but when we look at the differences, 74% of those age 75 plus said, I wanted to keep it pretty much the same as it is now. Nearly 2/3 of those who don't have children in the household, same scale. 59% who aren't participating in programs, same scale. When you look at who wants one or two larger or more unique structures, 87% of those with children want something unique or different. 87% who've lived here between 5 and 9 years, something different. 71% of program participants, 88% of Hispanic Latino residents, 77% of those under 45. So while this is fairly even, when you start looking at these two groups, certain groups really load on one side and other groups load on the other side. And this is that dichotomy that we've been seeing in this and in other questions.
Jeff,
Yes?
Could you remind us for that particular question whether those were the only two options
Those
as
were
an
the
answer?
only two options.
So neither and other were not options?
Right, correct.
Thank you.
Because again, what we kept hearing through much of this is the playground, something needs to be done with the playground equipment. That was a constant, and when you look at those dissatisfied comments about why are you dissatisfied, those parks that have playground equipment, that was always like the first or second response as to a source for dissatisfaction.
Thank you.
And then in the next question, we similarly asked, and this time we gave them 3 options for park improvements, potential park improvements. Adding more active recreational features, another sports or ball field, tennis, pickleball courts, basketball courts, splash pad, or spray ground, 50% were in favor of that. Adding passive recreational amenities, benches, landscaping, restrooms, 29%. Or maintain the parks as they exist, don't add any new features or amenities, 21%. And not surprisingly, that younger group, those with children, those who are participating in programs, newer residents, at least 2/3 roughly of those groups or more were in favor of more active amenities, active recreational amenities going in the parks. Those who wanted more passive tended to be somewhat longer-term residents, 20 to 34 years, and those who want to keep things as they are, 21% overall. That included half of the oldest residents who wanted that. So again, the biggest differentiator here is probably age, between maintain, add passive, add more active. We wrapped up the survey with some questions about how how they get information about department activity. Oh, I'm sorry. We asked this question, whether or not people see a relationship between Parks and Recreation and the positive impact that they have on property values. This is a question that we asked in the 2022 statewide survey for the IAPD. Over 2,000 residents across the state answering this question about their agency. Those responses from that 2022 survey are on the bottom, and overall 88% statewide said yes, there is a relationship between Parks and Recreation and improving property values. For residents in Riverside, likewise, 88% agree, they see a clear relationship, but the biggest difference is your residents more strongly see that relationship. Staff strongly agree with that statement versus only about a third of the residents statewide. So they get the relationship, they understand that. Okay. And then we wrapped up with questions about where they get information about the Parks and Rec Department and what it offers. Not surprisingly, the village and the webpage for the department is the top preferred source by 35%. The department's social media comes in at 15%. The updates in the Riverside Review were mentioned by about 1 out of 10, as were the digital program guide, and nearly as many mentioned the signs and banners at Centennial, local newspaper, and so on. What's important here is that, not surprisingly, younger people, women, those with children, newer residents, program participants, they tend to look to the department's social media pages, platforms. But the non-program participants are relying on the Riverside Review, the signage, and local papers for their information. So in terms of keeping those non-participants, those less engaged with these programs or events or improvements, those sources outside of the village or the department websites or social media are going to be especially important to reaching those non-participants. Again, much more detail, information in the full report, and a lot of sample verbatim comments, which if you haven't looked at those, I strongly encourage you to do so, because those are completely volunteered and unprompted responses, and they really help clarify a lot of the numbers I've thrown in front of you tonight. Any other questions or surprises or comments?
Questions from the trustees?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Just briefly, I mean, these are great data, and the department and the board are going to be going through it very thoroughly, I'm sure. I know that some survey options were sent to non-residents. Can you just briefly say, did we get any returns on those?
So we actually, for this survey, we got 312
one.
respondents, because we had one non-Riverside resident respond. And rather than have to deal with one respondent out of 312 in this whole report, we moved that person to the public survey. So after we closed our sample survey of 311, we provided a link that I think Barry Dunn or the village or the department were making available to anybody. If you didn't get a chance to submit a response to that survey, click on this QR code or go to this link. We got about another dozen or two responses there. Those are included in the full report. They're in the appendix. There's a top-line report that shows the overall responses from our 311 plus the dozen or two respondents, which include non-Riverside residents, side by side.
Thanks.
But not a lot of
No, I'm
non-Riverside.
I
Yes.
have a question on, it's page 6 on the property tax question. The question, I see you've written the question out here, and it's just how much of percent of your property taxes do you think goes to Parks and Rec? And I'm assuming most people would answer that question based on their total tax bill, meaning schools and
Yes.
other things. The less than 1%, is that less than 1% of the village property tax or less than 1% of the entire
The
property
entire tax bill.
Okay, so it's consistent in that?
Yes.
Good,
Yes.
thank you. Any other questions? Public comment, do we have anyone from the public who would like to comment on the survey? Yes? Yeah, please come to the microphone and introduce yourself. We know who you are, but those at home may not.
Thank you for the presentation. I thought it was very well, and I think the outreach that Parks and Rec has done has been really good to try to get some input. I'm Kathy Maloney. Just a quick question. I participated in one of the focus groups, and I found there was a lot of confusion as to the definition of a park, whereby people thought all of the green space in the village was a park versus, say, athletic fields or the 6 or 8, whatever it is, named parks. Was there anything in the survey that helped clarify that for people?
So for our definition of parks in the survey, it was largely that list that you saw. Centennial, Big Ball Park, Swan Pond, that entire list. It did not include like the little green triangle areas, for example. It was anything that basically has a name or would be easily recognized. So that's how we defined the parks in the survey itself.
And you feel that people understood that because they did not understand that in the focus group?
Well, that was really their option. Here's a list of parks. We did have, I think, an other response, but not a lot of people included other. Thought to click on other. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone, well, there's no action to be taken. I thought this was a terrific report, very well done.
Thank you.
I think it's going to be very valuable for us. There's a lot of really good data here that we can use moving forward. So thank you to Barry Dunn. We'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Okay, very good. If questions do come up, please just forward them to Ron or staff, and we'll answer them as quickly as we can. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to move to out of order on the agenda and take item 10A out of order at this time, since we have a resident here to speak to that matter, and that if there's no objection from the board, I'll move that direction. Item 10A, new business and ordinance granting consolidation approval for 121 South Coat Road. Assistant Manager Monroe.
Thank you. So this request came from the residents at 121 South Coat Road. They currently own 2 lots at that location. The western portion of the lot is developed. The eastern portion of their lot is undeveloped, but they still are 2 distinct parcels that they want combined. They also want to build an attached garage, and in a way that doesn't encroach on the required setbacks. So if we had let the 2 parcels remain separated, then they would encounter some zoning issues, and by combining the lots, they would be allowed to replace the existing garage on that lot. So this went to the Preservation Commission to get reviewed on August 8th. That was approved unanimously, and then it was also approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission on August 28th of 5-0. All the finding of facts are in your packet, and the owner is here if there are any questions. So are there any questions that you have this evening about this? Yeah.
I have a question. So the only plans you have for the second lot are just moving the driveway over to that lot and having a setback garage?
Correct.
That's it?
Yeah.
Are you tearing down the house or anything like that?
We'll be expanding the second floor in the current one, but keeping the structure, all the brick and everything exactly the same.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
I have a question. So we haven't had one of these requests in a very long time. We don't have standards, we have requirements, apparently 8 of them, and one of them is that large trees will be preserved whenever possible. So I don't know if you've seen the plans, maybe you can speak to it, but are any large trees going to be removed?
Not from this plan. There is one tree that's in the front that looks like it's might not be salvageable, but that's not going to be affected because of the plans or anything like that.
Thank you.
So there's no tree where the garage would be or anything like that.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Anyone in the audience? Don't see anyone. Anything else to add? Applicant, property owner, anything else you'd like to add?
No, just, I mean, we actually have lived in Riverside for 13 years. We live 5 doors down right now, so it's an area that we're excited to stay in and build our forever home kind of thing, so.
Great. Thank you. No further questions? If someone would like to make a motion to approve the plat of consolidation.
I'll second.
Motion by trustee Marshazga, second by trustee Evans. Any discussion on the motion? Clerk Sol.
Trustee Clarity?
Aye.
Trustee Evans?
Aye.
Trustee Galagos?
Aye.
Trustee Marshazga?
Aye.
Trustee Mateo?
Aye.
Ordinance is approved. Going back to the regular order of the agenda, under pending business is 9B, continued discussion of the Village of Riverside Capital Improvement Plan spanning fiscal years 25 to 34. Director Zavala.
Thank you, President Pollock. Good evening. As we continue our discussion about the CIP plan, I feel it's important to visit the general fund balance and how we fund our CIP plan in the capital projects fund. As you can see here, this is the general fund, and this is our balance at the, I think the batteries ran out. Sorry.
Flip it around.
Flip it. Oh, sorry, thank you. So total fund balance at the end of last year is right here, $6,982,000. These are 3 buckets of funding that the village has. And these are considered unassigned fund balances, according to Government Finance Officers Association. So prepaids is non-spendable, but this is a self-imposed restriction that the village imposes on itself. Prepaids hold our IRMA reserves, and those can be withdrawn and moved to the general surplus at any time. The second bucket is our operating reserves for $2,511,000. This is our fund balance policy, which is a very healthy fund balance policy. For GFOA, the Government Finance Officer Association, it is best practice to keep 2 months of reserves of the 2 months is calculated as 2024's budget expenditures, 2 months of the next year's expenditures. They recommend keeping 2 months at all times in all 3 buckets. The village keeps 3 months in this one bucket right here. And how we fund our capital projects is through the general surplus. So when it's time to plan, like we're doing now, we plan how much of this money are we going to spend, or do we want to use money from one of our other buckets? So you can see this is at the end of 2023. So we used $2 million here to transfer over to capital projects because that money was already designated for the fire pumper and the ambulance and projects that were expended this year. As we continue planning for next year, I feel it's important to know that there is not a deficit in the capital funds project. The village has sufficient funds, and the purpose of the CIP discussion is to decide what we want to spend that money on this year and what's the best way to fund it through the budgeting and planning process, which we do now. So you can change to the next slide. So to recap the last meeting, staff was asked to go back and make a CIP plan for next year that only includes the contractual agreements. Which we have, and you can see each expenditure has a note to why it's important to keep into the CIP plan for next year. But as Manager Frances emphasized upon today, is that the budget is just a plan. It's constantly evolving based on new information, new grants, new funding that comes to light. Just this morning, the village was notified that there is a $150,000 grant opportunity for capital that was appropriated to the village of Riverside for next year for 2025. Based on that information, there's no need for a transfer from IRMA at all. That the whole every project will be funded, and we actually have the opportunity now to look at any projects that were removed, added to next year, and pick if we want to add those back onto the project into 2025 based on the grant contingency.
That's really good news.
Yes, it's very good. It's very good news. It's very good news, and it's good to highlight that the budgets are always changing. I know looking at the CIP plan, the 10-year, it can look daunting because there's like millions of dollars being spent, but it's because that's a planning document. So if there's a large expenditure in 5 years, we need to start planning for it now. We don't know what those revenues are going to look at that time, but we need to put it on the radar, and we need to start planning and making a plan of how we are going to fund those larger items down the road. So it might look scary because it might look like we're spending more than we can, but we're not. Every year the plan is reevaluated to see what makes sense for the village that year. What can we spend money on? What can we push to another year? What is the priority for the village? And that's very important. So there are a couple of different charts here to show what was removed for the board meeting last 2 weeks ago. You can see here we moved the strategic plan, the gateway signage, the skid steer, and the fire department vehicle. Also, the grants underneath, those are projects that we will do if we can obtain grant funding. Next one. And the last chart here are other projects that were removed to reduce expenses but can be reevaluated based on the current funding through the grant to see if there's anything that would the village would like to add back on into the plan.
Do you have anything to add?
No, I think Director Zavala did an excellent job of kind of outlining for the board the different options. I think that, we now have this unique opportunity wherein the state of Illinois releases certain appropriations. So every year they do an appropriation bill, but they only release certain grants. And so we're fortunate enough that the timing was that the $150,000 grant was released today. Very timely for this discussion. So I feel really fortunate that we are not only able to announce one grant, but 2 grants at one board meeting that we received in 1 week.
Thank you. So just for clarification, with that additional appropriation from the state of Illinois, we don't have to use IRMA funds, but we still need to defer those projects in the strategic plan, wayfinding signage, that first table. We still would defer those.
Yes, and the other chart of additional projects that.
Right, and we would still make the second table grant contingent, still do that, and then the third table, it's some of that, could we put some of that back in at this point? And
Yes.
is that a discussion we need to have now?
Yes, please.
Okay. So how much, again, without touching IRMA, how much money do we have, or were you going to get into that, or how much of this could we consider?
So essentially, approximately 100,000, based on the 50,000 that essentially we would have had to shift funds from one account to another. Now we don't have to do that because we're getting the grant appropriation. Another option that the board can evaluate is, remember, as Director Zavala said, this budget document is a living, breathing document and it evolves. So the board could technically decide we want to include all those items in the budget. And then we would evaluate those items as they came due for recommendation by village staff. So you have a couple of different tools in your toolbox to kind of figure out what serves the interests of the village best. Because just because it is budgeted does not mean that staff could classify it within the 3rd or 4th quarter of next year. and be making assessments based on that. The budget is for appropriation purposes, it's for filing with Cook County, and so you have to make sure that you have that adopted by the end of the year, hence our discussion. That doesn't mean that you can't make decisions or make changes to it sometime next year too, or defer certain items too, if they come in higher than anticipated, and we've done that in the past too.
So trustees, what do you think? I'm going to take a guess here that given this relatively small amount and the importance of trees in this village, that reforestation and spongy moss spray is something you'd probably like to keep in the budget for sure. That's a consensus? So then that leaves us, that's $40,000, so that leaves us another 60. The computer replacement, I think that's such a small amount, we can do that contingent on having excess exceeding our revenues. So for budget purposes, we can do the same with the fire and police department radio replacement, except that we could allot $60,000. And we talked to Chief Buckley before tonight's meeting, and his suggestion, and I tend to agree, is that we just budget that for $60,000 for sure and let him decide how he wants to spend it between police and fire.
Yes.
And if we have excess revenues, we'll come back and we'll spend more on radios.
Okay.
Everybody? So we're good? We have consensus? Our staff is incredible, as you all know. They figure out how to get these things done, and that is really, really appreciated. So thank you, Director Zavala, Clerk Soul, I know worked on this as well, and especially Manager Francis, as always. Do we have any further review, comments, discussion from the board? I don't want to steal everybody's show.
There is one more item, President
Okay.
Pollock.
Yes.
If we could review, we need to review the water sewer fund. Next year, we have multiple projects planned and the lead service line replacements. In order to complete our projects, we need to issue alternate bond issuance of $6 million, which was included in your packet. It's interest rate, coupon rate 4% with the repayment of 20 years. And for the lead service line replacement, the village has received intent of funding of $4 million of a 0% interest loan, and that it has a term of 30 years. Both of these debt issuances go hand in hand in order to do the projects. The lead service line replacements will be done in conjunction and will put us on place to meet the state mandated replacement due by 2027. We have to issue our final plan. But that's not when they all have to be finished, but we have to start doing so many lines a year.
Any questions, trustees?
I don't have a question about what, so I don't have a question about what you just shared. I do want to ask about the chassis. I know you took it out of the consent agenda, but is it stalled? Could you-
No, we're going to come back to that and
Okay.
vote on that after we conclude
Okay.
this discussion. Yeah, because, again, because we discussed it, I wanted to give trustees opportunities to comment on it if they wanted. Any discussion on the water sewer fund capital?
So the service lines that are scheduled for replacement in 2025, if I remember correctly, those are all on public property and don't have to be tied in with any street
Correct.
repairs or
Correct.
reviews?
The street repairs, the repaving will happen in 2026. So 2025, then we put the patch after completing the water sewer project, and then 2026, the overlay will happen.
Great, thanks.
You're welcome.
But it's important to note that patches will be removed and the resurfacing will occur if the referendum is approved. If it is not, then the community will have to live with patches until we accumulate enough resources to then do the resurfacing, which could take quite some time.
Good points.
if it's okay, staff will draft the ordinances needed for the next board meeting in order to go ahead with issuing both debt issuances.
Yes.
Okay.
So I believe we have consensus on the capital CIP. The next item on the agenda was the item removed from the consent agenda, and that is sales agreement with JX Truck Center for a total amount not to exceed $146,749.98 for the purchase of a 2025 Peterbilt plow truck chassis. Again, we can now proceed with that purchase without dipping into our IRMA reserves. Is any questions on this, or any questions on this item from the board? No one in the public to comment. Someone like to make a motion to approve the
We'll make
sales?
said motion to approve.
I'll second.
Motion by trustee Gallego, second by trustee Evans. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Clerk Sol, please call the roll.
Trustee Clarity? Aye. Trustee Evans?
Aye.
Trustee Gallegos?
Aye.
Trustee Marshazga? Trustee Mateo?
Aye.
Motion's approved, sales agreement's approved. Where am I? We did new business. The second item on new business, 10B, review 2025 goals of village departments, advisory boards, and commissions. Clerk Sol.
Good evening. This item is a continuation of our budget document process. Last year was the first time that staff presented the goals of each department, board, and commission, also the accomplishments from the current fiscal year through our third quarter for review by the village board, comment, and such. These goals will be included in the budget document that you'll see hopefully at the first board meeting in December. And if you guys have any comments or questions on these goals or accomplishments, you're more than welcome.
Questions or comments from the trustees, and this won't be your only chance. If you, as you review this and as we prepare the budget, these are, can be discussed at any time. And I believe next board meeting, we'll talk specifically about board goals for 2025. But any questions on the department and committee goals at this time, or comments? Seeing none, there's no action to be taken. And again, if you have any comments, feel free to email Manager Francis, and we can she can have her staff address those. Trustee reports. Are there any trustee reports this evening? None? Okay. We do have need for an executive session this evening to discuss probable, imminent, or pending litigation. The board will not reconvene and no final action will take place. I would ask for a motion and a second to adjourn to executive session.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. All of those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.